Okay, today we're going to finish off our Chalav, finally, after all these weeks. And not on purpose, but it's going to end up being a summary of a bunch of things that we did previously. If you took akum and you cooked it in a pot, then it makes the pot chafe just like any other isser. Even though it's only a suffix, so you might think that it's only a suffix isser because it's a suffix. Maybe they mixed in treif into it, and we should treat it more kal. It's not true. We treat it as complete isser. It's an isser the whole food, and it's as if you had cooked something treif in it. The same as if you cooked gevinas akum in a kli, then the kli is treif. The kli has to be kashered. Even though gevinas akum, we didn't do gevinas akum yet, that's going to be halacha beis. But gevinas akum was also only a suffix. Maybe he was maimed. Even if he had been maimed, it wouldn't be so terrible anyhow. But, I mean, even had you really been someone maimed with treif, even so chacham asked the food, once chacham asked the food, then it's usher, and you have to kasher the keilim, even though it's only a suffix. Aval, lo yachem shalem. But that din that we just said about chalav akum and gevinas akum doesn't apply to butter. That's going to be halacha gimel. That if you makom shnoga with isser, even though we'll see in halacha gimel that there are those who hold that chemes akum is mutter, in a cheress keilim shenis bas behem v'loy taruv shala, that it doesn't answer the keilim if you're cooking it, and it doesn't answer taruvas if you mix it in with another food. It doesn't answer it either. Shenis arva beheter hakol shari. The place can talk about, but it's assumed that if it's butter baroiv, then it's mutter. Because from the next verse, that there it said that pas akum is also doesn't answer other foods. If it gets mixed into another food, as long as it's butter baroiv, it's mutter. And it doesn't answer keilim, it doesn't answer other foods. Okay, with if you have chol akum that was also if you turn it later and you make cheese out of it or you make butter out of it, it doesn't become mutter. Even though those two things would have been reasons to make it mutter. He just mentioned that chema might be mutter, and gevina also, there's reason to think it's mutter. On the cheress, be surah, the whole shanasim, and also everything is also. Okay, that last part about whether if you did something to it, you should make it, it should become mutter or not, that's going to really be for halacha beis. We'll talk about it in Mitzvah Shem and halacha beis, which is about gevina. Okay, so the main thing we have to talk about is the first part, which is kashering after chalav akum and gevinas akum. The Shach says, just to start, even though we had a machlokes in Kufid Beis, where they have to kasher after bishul akum, okay, there was a machlokes 2 days in Shulchan where they have to kasher after bishul akum. That's because bishul akum is ein le'ikum and a terror. It's not based on any real chashash of an issa d'oraisa, and therefore there's a machlokes where they have to kasher after that. Our chumrah that we have to kasher after chalav akum and gevinas akum is because there's a chashash that the person added, drew a treif into it. It's based on a d'oraisa, and therefore that's why everyone agrees on it. You have to kasher. Okay. Okay. So we have a few things to talk about. As you'll see, many of them we've talked about. We're just pulling together from we talked about way back when. Okay, the first is the Ramah says that you have to kasher after chalav akum. Okay, and that's true. That everyone agrees that you have to kasher after chalav akum. Okay, as you may well know, there's a difference of opinion as to what we should do about chol stam. Whether people should or shouldn't kasher after chol stam. We talked about chol stam plenty of times already. There's a difference as what to do. One group of people, particularly the Hasidic community, says, well, the Ramah says that after chol akum we have to kasher. We don't eat chol stam. We don't accept that you should eat chol stam. So what do you do? So it's chol akum. The Ramah says himself that you have to kasher after chol akum. So of course you don't eat from keilim that you use on chol stam is not mutter. So it's chol akum or chol akum. You have to kasher after it. So it's really a very straightforward way of looking at it. The Ramah says that you have to kasher after it. Other people, the whole other group of people who eat chol yisrael, we'll call them the yeshivish community, okay, who eat chol yisrael, the other big group of people who eat chol stam, they say that they're only not eating chol stam because of a chumrah. Really, minadin, Chazir said it was mutter, and Rabbi said it was mutter, and so they have plenty of reasons to think that really it's mutter minadin. They're just being machmir on it for whatever reason. That's sort of, we talked about that a little last time, why we would be machmir, but they choose to be machmir about it. And therefore, they don't go so far as to asa the keilim. In fact, Repenkin, it's printed in what's called Kosher Repenkin, says, he says, I feel machmir mekilim bekelim, they're not machmir to to be machmir on kelim for that.
Could you hold it as awesome and still not be machmir again?
Well, the Rama said not like that. The Rama said that if you...
No, it's also not din, but I don't go so far to be machmir kelim.
So what does that mean?
Where do you put the thing called Chalav Rhinus? Right?
That's what we're coming to.
Is that, don't everybody else hold it awesome and
So very good. That's exactly what we're going to. So the Shach, not talking about Chol, he's talking about Chem actually. He says, look over there in Simon Kufi test. And Rabbi Shachter learned it this way. And he says, if you look at the Shach and Kufi test, there's also a pre-Chodesh about it in Aruch. He says that if a person has a chumrah about a specific din, there's a certain thing that he's machmir on that other people are not machmir on, then that person could eat he could go to the house of a person who's makel and eat from his kelim. Of course, he's not choshesh that the person would serve him the food because the person knows that he's machmir. But what about his kelim? He doesn't have to be worried about the person's kelim because he could assume that those kelim are in b'nei Yemen. Okay, that's what he's allowed to do. He assumes that those kelim are in b'nei Yemen. So it's actually
no. Help over here because it's chalav. Not going to be. There's no tzad that's going to be pagan.
No, he said seconds.
So what's maybe it's pagan.
No, maybe it's mutter. No. I think maybe it's mutter. I don't know. It could be that's what it is. Maybe the second topic that is mutter. I'm not sure.
I remember when a gay go by the Sfardim, or by your Paskins, you can go to
Ashkenazi restaurant.
Ashkenazi restaurants.
Okay, maybe that is. Maybe I don't remember. Or maybe that is what it is. It depends on maybe it's a svek. Actually, these places can argue whether he should ask the guy. If we said it's totally on it's being any bigger, why don't you ask the guy? Say the guy, when did you last use your pot for milk? Okay, but anyhow,
Kashrus says by Yoshin also, right? Kashrus said that.
Same thing. It's the same thing. Yes. There it's harder to hear because there you think the people are doing it minadin. They're not doing it as a chumrah. So he says look, the people who are being machmir on are only doing it as a chumrah. They're only doing it as a chumrah when there's a machlokes. In other words, and therefore you're only doing it as a chumrah. You're allowed to be silent that the other person's ain't been here. Not the way you're saying it. You're saying is that I hold that it's also minadin, but I only answer it halfway.
Isn't that Chalav Rhinus when they hold it's also minadin? Those are machmir that hold it's also minadin.
They hold that it's also minadin. Is that what it is? They hold that it's also minadin. You see, it's not a chumrah. It's not a.
What's the sort of
That's a din. What? Certain cheress that they hold.
Maybe something.
Okay, I'm not sure. Okay.
Still.
Last, there's another group of people. Okay, another group of people who hold that you should be machmir, and as the kelim, you should not use the kelim of Chalav Stam because they think Chalav Stam is usher. So they hold like that first group of people that hold that it's what the Rama said, but they only do that for private use. Okay, that means if they go to their brother-in-law's house and he eats Chalav Stam, they won't eat in his house because it has kelim tray. Okay, well they'll make sure they have special pots for them because they think kelim trays. But commercially, they'll eat stuff made in the milk of kelim, and that's for a completely different reason. It's not because they think it's Chalav Stam as mutter. It just happens to be that when you buy things that are kelim that are made commercially, there's almost always, it's come out always that it's Balta Mashishin. The beliefs are in there Balta Mashishin. There's another study, we talked about this in Kufid Gimel, we talked about it, that maybe we should say Stam Keilim in Ibn Yemen. There's a good tzad to say that Stam Keilim in Ibn Yemen, even though the factory you go to 24 hours a day, good tzad to say Stam Keilim in Ibn Yemen, we talked about that then. So the people giving hashgacha have to do their responsibility and write that it's milchiks, or write DE on it, because if they don't do that, then they're doing the wrong thing because they didn't catch the kelim. But they do what they have to do, and we do what we have to do. They have to write milchiks on it, and we can happily eat it because we know that the suck and the milchiks isn't responsible. So it's like a game, you know. They do their job, we ignore them. Okay, they write DE and we do what we want to. Okay. So that's for people at home what they do about the Chalav Stam. Let's move to a few examples that forget us from the hashgacha side of it about how we should treat what we should do about kashering if the chalav or gevinas akum. Okay, I have 4 things to talk about. Okay, first is the din is that if you cook something straight on the pot on the fire, you put something onto the fire without any liquid on it. The din is that you have to do libun gamur on it. Okay, you take a piece of meat and you take a piece of treif meat and you put it into a pan and you broil it over there. You want to catch that clear, you have to do libun gamur on it. Okay, the Gemara says that there's a even though that's the din, you have to do libun gamur. If the thing that you cooked was heter, then you don't have to do libun gamur. Okay, the Gemara's case is, the Gemara is talking about karbanis, before they became nicer, that they, when you cooked it on the pot, it was heter. So the din is, if you cooked heter on the kli, right on the fire, you don't have to do libun. That's the Gemara's case is by a case of heter, and the boys can speak out that it's not only by that specific case, it's by any case of heter. Okay, so we don't have any other cases of heter. The case of the Gemara is talking about karbanis. We don't have that. We pass in that chametz is iser. So we pass in chametz. We put Pesach as iser also. That's machlokes there. We talked about this way back. That was we talked about in Tafel now. We pass in chametz as iser. So we don't do that. But we have two cases. We do have two cases that we do, which is if you cook either milchigs or fleishigs. Okay, it was kosher in your house, and you cook either kosher milchigs and kosher fleishigs, not both, but you did, or at least both together. You did them each one in a pan. Then the din is you don't have to do libun on it. You could do hagala or libun kal. So you had a frying pan that was a milchig frying pan. This is a common case that happens. Person has a milchig frying pan, and it was ain't a binyan, right? And then he went ahead and broiled a piece of meat in it in his milchig frying pan. So he has a frying pan that's now milchigs and fleishigs. He wants to make it back to being milchigs. So it's not possible whole. He didn't do it within 24 hours. It wasn't possible whole. He wants to make it back to being a milchig frying pan. The pan was only used. It would need libun because you put it right on the fire. But since it was heter, you could do hagala or libun kala. You don't have to do libun gamur to it. Okay, that was back in. That's a din from Tafel. When we spoke about it, we said it like this: What should we do if we cooked Chalav Stam on a kli? What should we do if Chalav Stam was cooked in a kli? Okay, I don't know how common this case is. We have more cases coming that are a little more common. If you had cooked Chalav Stam straight on a kli, what should you say about that kli? Do you have to do libun or hagala to the kli? I'll give an example. As I'm talking, I'm thinking an example. Okay, the person cooked French toast. Okay, they fried French toast on a kli without any liquid on it, and it had milk in it. Okay, so should they? And it was kosher, except that it was Chalav Stam. Now they want to make something powerful on it afterwards.
Pancakes.
They made pancakes. Okay, they made pancakes. So should they kash it with libun, or should they kash it with hagala? Should we say they need libun because the people who are going to eat the powerful food afterwards, for them we just made isser on here. We didn't make heter; it was isser. Or should we say is we should make you should do hagala to it because what we put on here was heter. What we put on here was Chalav Stam was mutter. Okay, so which one should we do? So, as you may remember from Pafanov, we talked about this in Halacha Dalet, the Rabbi Shepta said, obviously, if we give a hefsher on the stuff as Chalav Stam, obviously we hold that Chalav Stam is mutter. He said, we have thousands of products that we give hashkafa to, obviously we hold it heter. So we think it's completely mutter. So if we hold it heter, we could do hagala to it. He says, but we have a little problem. The problem, 100% we could do hagala to it. The problem is that there are people who buy power products, and for those people, we're misleading them. Because there are some of those people who buy power, those are the people who hold, some of those people even hold you have to kasher, you have to Chalav Stam. So for those people, we're not being fair to them, because they're expecting power as if Chalav Stam is isser, and we're not giving it to them. So he said, no problem. He says, Moshe says, that if a kli is ain't a binyan, then food that's cooked on there is mutter, not to the evet, it's mutter l'chatchila to eat that food. If a kli is ain't a binyan. No, ain't a binyan completely. He says it's an issur for you to cook the food. The issur is on the person. You're not allowed to cook that food with plans of eating it. But once the food was cooked, the food is not mutter, but the food is mutter l'chatchila. He says, so the person eating, if we wait for the kli to be ain't a binyan, wait for the kli, if it'll be ain't a binyan, we're giving him food that's kosher l'chatchila for him to eat. We have a responsibility to not give it to him without kashering it first. Okay, our responsibility, we took care by doing hagala, because we hold that it's mutter. So we did what we had to do.
What do you do hagala for? Our responsibility is mutter anyway.
It's milchigs. No, from milchigs to parav. From milchigs, we have to do something. We have to kasher from heter from milchigs to parav. So we have to do what we had to do. We did hagala. For that person, we waited for Eda Ben Yom, so we're giving him stuff that's kosher not to give. We're giving him kosher l'chatchil. That's what he wants. Kosher l'chatchil.
Who's going to have to kasher from milchigs to parav? If something that's not normally eaten with meat, right? There's no kasher on the person eating with meat, right? Is there a reason to cut them?
I think we talked about argued about this back and stuff now. Okay. Let's okay. We really okay. So presumably Rabbi Shepta would agree that if you were kashering not from milchigs to parav, but from Chalav Stam to Chalav Yisrael, okay, if the next product was not a power product, it was a Chalav Yisrael product, you're mamish making it for the guy who wants Chalav Yisrael, then he might maybe be soften a little bit and think that you need libun. Because that guy, you're making it for this guy, maybe he think you have to do more. Okay? Rabbi Dusky didn't buy this. Rabbi Dusky says, what are you talking about? He says, Hashgachas don't take opinions on this. He says, we don't have an opinion. He says, we offer services to people who want Chalav Yisrael, and services to people who want Chalav Stam. So we don't have an opinion about Chalav Stam is mutter. So we have to treat it for those people as if we don't have an opinion. Okay, Rabbi Shefter didn't get it. He says, I don't mean you don't have an opinion. Thousands and thousands of products that are Chalav Stam that we're giving Hashgachas to, we don't have an opinion. He said, we have an opinion. Of course we have an opinion about it. We're giving Hashgachas to. Okay, so we talked about it in Aruch. That was one, and Paftanal. This is one shaila that has to do with how should you treat Kashering if they're Chalav Stam. Okay. Another shaila that's maybe a little bit more nicer, which is like this. So you have to close your ears to this. Okay, you shouldn't listen. Okay, the Shach says in Kuf Lamed Hey that there's if the four isurim, if the kovush of four isurim, you could kasher more kal. Okay, there's an easier way to kasher if the four isurim than everything else. For regular kovush, you have to hagol gamur. If something was issue was kovush in the kli, you have to hagol gamur. For four special isurim, four special things you can kasher. You don't have to hagol gamur. You could do instead milu v'iru, iru klirishin. You don't have to hagol gamur. And those four things are stam yayin, chametz b'chol pesach, basar or chalav. Okay, so he said a basar or chalav. The reason why is because since they're heter, therefore you could kasher with just milu v'iru or iru klirishin, and you don't have to do what he calls a hagol gamur. So the question is, what happens if the kli held Chalav Stam? And this is the practical part of the shayla is like this. Many times those tanks that hold Chalav Stam, that just hold cold milk, are, so to speak, flimsy. They're not strong enough to really hold, to be kashered with a real hagala with roistim. So if you're going to kasher it with just, if you want to do iri klirishin, or you want to do mili v'iri, that you could pull off. If you think it's heter, you could do that. If you could treat it as isser, and you want to kasher it, it's not one of these four cases, you have to do a regular hagala gemura, then it's going to be close to impossible to kasher the tank. Okay? It makes it close to impossible to kasher the tank. So we took this.
What kind of hagala gemura are you talking about? Dunking in a pool?
So what that means is we talked about that then also. What hagala gemura means, all this we talked about in Taftanal Chaf Aleph.
We call it, and if you do urate to hot pot, that's called klirishin.
That's what we talked about. We talked all about this in Taftanal before your time. You'll listen to the recording. That one we have. The one before him, we lost part of it. But anyhow, in Chaf Aleph, so in this case, Rabbi Shefter was obvious that he thought you could be mutter because he held it's heter. The Hashgacha says it's heter as long as it's aimed ben yomer, just to help those people who are parav, but it's considered heter. In this case, Rabbi Dusky was also mekel. Even though in the last case he said Hashgacha don't have opinions, in this case he was mekel because, one of the other answers that the Shach thinks about over there, the Shach rejects it. One of the something that the Shach thinks about over there is that maybe by all isurim drabanan, you could do milu v'iri. Okay, so he says, well, chalav akum is not more than isur drabanan. So therefore, even though the Shach rejects it, but b'tziruf, the fact that many people hold that chalav stam is really mutter anyhow. So he said, okay, in this case you could get away with it. And he said they could do iru klirishin or milu v'iri. Okay. Next, third case. We're getting through quick over here. Third case. The Ramah said that after gevinas akum, you have to kasher also. Okay, just like we till now we're talking about chalav akum, but gevinas akum also has it. So the Shach over here points out that the way the Ramah puts it, he says chalav and gevina has a certain din, and chema has a different din, and by chema it has to be both the baroiv. Okay, and the way the Ramah sets it up, the implication is pretty clear that he holds that gevinas akum, in order to be mutter, has to be bought the b'shishim. It's like a regular, so it has to be bought the b'shishim. Chema is bought the baroiv. Okay, but gevina has to be bought the b'shishim. The Shach says, and that's what the Ramah says, and the Shach agrees with the Ramah. But the Shach brings that the Issa v'heter says not like that. The Issa v'heter says that gevinas akum it only has to be bought the baroiv. The Shach doesn't hold like that. But the Shach says, and the Chacham Sodom say, that even though we pass in the gevinas akum needs to be bought the b'shishim, the makom hefsid, he said makom hefsid meruba, he says you can be mekel and say that it's bought the baroiv. Okay, it doesn't have to be bought the b'shishim. Okay, so what? Negate to us is, of course, it's negate if it would fall into a food, you would say it would be bought the baroiv. It could be bought the baroiv, makom hefsid meruba, but it has a big nafkamina for kashering, and that is like this. Usually things that have gevinas akum that you have to kasher after are things that the gevina is bought the baroiv. Okay, you have pizza. Okay, they're making pizza on a kli and you want to kasher it. Well, it's not more than roiv cheese. So as you couldn't eat the pizza because the pizza's the end. But as far as the keilim are concerned, if we would say that the gvin is bata b'roiv, then the pizza's kosher. Right? I mean, if it would be bata, you couldn't eat it because the be'en is there. You have to remove the be'en. But as far as blias, the blias that are coming out of the pizza are kosher because the blias is bata b'roiv. So if we would say that the gvin is bata b'roiv, then the food is been
in the food that you're doing.
In the food, no, butler in itself. If the pizza is 70% dough and sauce and 30% cheese, so that thing is mutter. Why is cheese there? No, it's not mutter for a technicality. You can't eat it because
so the piece of cheese falls on the pan and there's nothing. No. So you get pure cheese into it.
Put that on side. Yes, you're right.
Take the cheese inside.
You're right that when the cheese falls off, that's a different schmooze. What we do about the cheese falling off. But the thing itself, let's say cheese will fall.
The blias, there's a piece of cheese on top of the pizza, and the blias came through the pizza. Yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah, fine. Right.
But it's not the way it happens. There's cheese all over the place.
Okay, so maybe you don't like my case of pizza. Okay, we're making danishes. No, really, because it's really we could talk about that separately. I'm making danishes, okay? And in the Danish, there is 3% cheese in the Danish. Okay, so there's no cheese falling every place. It's a Danish. So according, if you would say that if you hold, according to this event, it's bata b'roiv, and the Danish is kosher. You can really eat the Danish if you wanted to. So we have to kasher the kli because I didn't really hold this bata b'shishim, and it needs to be bata b'shishim means that really it's not kosher. It's only b'makom hefsed beruba, but all of a sudden, now that we have this tzad, because of that, Rabbi Schwartz said, I believe Rabbi Shechter spoke about it also, Rabbi Schwartz for sure said it, but clear up a whole bunch of other things. He said you could kasher those keilim with libun kal instead of with libun gamur. Okay, we spoke about this in Tafnal Halacha Dalet. Yeah, that's the one that we lost. Tafnal Halacha Dalet, I think it's the one we lost, the end of that one. The tziruf from there were, some people hold, we'll see in Halacha Beis, Rabbeinu Tam holds that gevinas akum is mutter gluten nowadays. The Taz holds that it's only asim misafik. Ramosha holds that for Kosher companies, you don't have to kasher any of Tani Ben Yamar. And we see all those things together, but Ramah said that, that's where it came to Halacha Dal over there, Ramah said that anytime you're doing libun as a chumrah, you could just do libun kal. So they said you could kasher libun, you could kasher this kli with libun kal, and this is a huge nafkamina, okay, because any kli that needs to have libun gamur, it's almost impossible to get a kasher, except with our special friends in Orion, Oliver Shalom. I don't know if they're around anymore, but anyhow, most people can't kasher libun gamur. So, okay, somebody else. So that means if you have a company that has 500 sheet pans and you want them to become kosher, you say, forget it, I can't become kosher because I can't do libun gamur. But if it turns out that the only thing that was treif was the gevinas akum, which is common enough that that's the problem, that it only was gevinas akum, and the gevinas akum is bata b'roiv, which it typically is, then you can say, no, it's okay, no problem. We get away with just libun kal instead of doing libun gamur. And in a lot of cases, that's the difference between they can become kosher, they can't become kosher. Okay. Lastly is, in the Chavkas Ben Yomin, right here on the din, he brings a whole discussion in place about what happens if the kli that you need to kasher is a kli cheress. And that means if it's kli cheress, the other kind of kli that needs libun is a kli cheress. There, even if it's heter, you need to do libun on it. So if you have a kli cheress, which means basically, you're not going to be able to kasher it. So what's going to be if you have a kli cheress? This din that you say that you have to kasher after Chalav Yisrael, Chalav akum, or gevinas akum, that din, does that apply also if the kli you have to kasher is cheress? There's a whole to-do about it. A whole place came back and forth about it. And it would be negated to us if a person had their kli, they had a marginizer, and the marginizer had a ceramic piston in it. Okay? So the ceramic piston that's cheress, and it's used with Chalav Stam, let's say even Chalav akum. Okay, so the person wants to, we need to kasher, we need to do libun, basically you need to replace the pistons, okay? Or you had that's one thing, you replace the pistons. What happens if you had the packing in a distillation column? The packing could be ceramic. So again, there's a huge expense to change that. So he says, do we need to do and the only thing that was in there was Chalav akum or gevinas akum. So would we say that even that
product? The marginizer is a liquid product. Why would you do libun?
No. Okay, we're not doing libun here because it was cooked straight on the fire. It was because cheress. So it was cheress. So the question, you don't have a heter. The fact that it's heter doesn't make it better. Cheress that was cooked with iser even if the Isser was heter, so to speak, even if the Isser was heter, you still need to do libun. So there's a whole to do there whether you could be mako. We're not going to talk about that. Whether you could be mako because since that you can't kasher clean, maybe you don't have to kasher them. So that is a tiruf. That possibility is a tiruf to the cases we talked about until now. We said if the person had this huge tank that he couldn't do regular hagol gamur, or he had a sheet pans that couldn't be kashered. He couldn't be kashered with libun gamur, and we had to study him as to why you should maybe be making and say, no, you can get away with it because maybe it is heter, or maybe because it's a tiruf that the gevinas akum is bottle. We had things to talk about, so this is an added tiruf to all those cases, that it could be that this whole din doesn't apply if you're going to have to kasher, it means you won't be able to kasher at all. Okay? Not every one of the study works, but it's a possibility to throw that in as an extra time.